Have you ever rewatched a movie before and you've always wondered to yourself if that movie had so much more difference to an alternative ending? Well, you're not alone. I have plenty good excellent theory about the fifth Keroro Gunsou film that came out in 2010. For those who are unfamiliar with the Keroro Gunsou franchise, Keroro Gunsou started out as a manga made by Yorishiki and was adapted into an anime series in 2004. Then it spawned a film franchise starting in 2006, ending in 2010. It only had 5 movies which were released in 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009, and 2010, as well as this feeling in my brain as telling me every time I watch the Keroro Gunsou film, the feeling I also have at the end of the film is where my story begins. For those who haven't watched the movie, it ends with Keroro and Fuyuki shooting out the Lonera from the sky. As the movie ends, this is where my fury kind of kicks in. What if I told you that the ending I mentioned was fabricated and was just a thought? I know, it sounds silly, but hear me out. What I actually do think it is with the ending was just all in Fuyuki's thought. Well, in his head. Well, I think what happened is that shortly after, spoiler alert, Keroro's death at the hands of the main antagonist of the film, Fuyuki couldn't cope with such a traumatic loss, so he decided to create his own memory of an alternative outcome. That alternative outcome being a happy ending. But here's the evidence to support my theory. If I'm sure you're asking yourself about how can a statue can still support a theory about a character making up a happy ending. But this is my explanation. At the beginning of the movie, Atlas Southern Cross gives Fuyo a small statue. One thing that makes the statue stand out is that it looks more like Kiryu, and it had a minor role of the thought of the movie. But when Kiryu dies, Fuyo is just traumatized throughout the film. We see it carry the statue on his backpack. That was when until he grabs the statue out of his bag after Kiryu's death and starts screaming. He starts yelling about how his statue's his fault for getting him caught up in his adventure in the first place. In Fuyo's voice, it sounded more genuine when he starts yelling about the statue. It almost sounds like he is about to do the unthinkable. The statue's eyes begin to glow, and Fuyo just notices this, and then decides to bury the statue onto the ground, thus giving Kiryu and helping him save the world, destroy Akio for good. But in reality, that didn't happen. However, instead, Fuyo, who decides he got so mad, he actually stands in front of the cliff. But he didn't jump off of it. Instead, he throws the statue into the ocean, like how Tony Stark threw his Arc reactor into the ocean at the end of Iron Man 3, which came out 3 years after the 5th Keroro Gunsou film. But what if the statue was actually means something? I mean, it's modeled after Kiryu and Fuyo's crying about Kiryu's death. But what if the statue actually predicted Kiryu's death? Speaking of predicting someone's death, this is what it brings up to. One consistent running around element in the movie is a dream Fuyuki had at the beginning of the movie. He had said about that dream that Kiryu and his platoon were then defeated in some way by an evil spirit. The evil spirit being Akio. What if the dream wasn't another factor about Kiryu's death in the movie? In the dream that we did see a scene in which Kiryu is basically obliterated into smithereens by a laser beam. And at the end of the movie, we see a scene where Akio shoots himself with a laser from his staff, causing Meko Kiryu to be obliterated. Curing Kiryu instantly. Sure, that's a coincidence, but it didn't look like a coincidence to me. To me, I still think it's a sign of anxiety. It could still mean something that in Fuyuki's mind worried about the evidence of the dream being a reality, which it did. It might have been a sign that Fuyuki might have been predicting about Kiryu's death, but that doesn't seem to be knowing it. He'd know that he was predicting such a traumatic event in the movie. If you don't think that it supports my theory enough, well, that leads us to another piece of evidence that follows and supports my theory about Fuyuki dreaming the whole thing at the end of the credits. It turns out back in the real world, another of Fuyuki threw statue in the ocean. He still looks back at the wreckage of where Kiryu has died, tears welling up in his eyes, and then he puts his hands out over his face and begins to sob quietly. He sobs more and more, and as he fell into the river, just crying his eyes out, like if someone who had lost something important. I bet you're wondering why at the end credits of the movie didn't support my theory about a boy, something important. I bet you're wondering about why he's coming to dreaming up with a happily ever after that never happened in the first place. Well, here's my theory. Throughout the film at the end credits, there were previous scenes of the movie that came out before the 5th Keroro Gunsou film. What if that scene played out like the credits to have a different meaning? What if there was like all the memories of Fuyuki and then shared with Keroro? Well, remember how I say that Fuyuki was crying and sobbing at the death of his best friend? Well, he was actually trying to reminisce all the good times he had shared with Keroro just to make him feel better. But another theory I have is that the ending with Fuyuki throwing the statue into the ocean and breaking down into tears was supposed the ending for the film, but then it showed down with executive at Sunrise. The company that made the movies didn't really feel like it, so they decided to scrap the ending and make a newer ending with a much lighter tone, that the ending had never been used in the final film. That concludes my theory where Fuyuki is unable to cope such a tragic event, so he decided to make his own memory of what could happen, and he blurred out the Keroro statue in the soil of the island. Some say that the 5th Keroro Gunsou film's ending was a great way to end the movie franchise for good, but I highly doubt that that's ever the case. If that was the final installment of the film franchise, but deep down, it's an ending that was a whole lot different meaning than what you think about it. Some endings, if you look closely and know, not all sunshine, lollipops, and rainbows, they could tell much more than a different meaning. Before I end this theory off, let me leave you a final note. When you rewatch the 5th Keroro Gunsou film again after reading this, you'll begin to see the ending much more differently. Because I mentioned like that before, the ending you saw in the movie was all in Fuyuko's imagination, trying to recreate a happily ever after that sadly never happened at all. And that, my little pretties, was all in Fuyuki's head, a Keroro Gunsou Fury Pasta, written by Affan Jamsari. Affan Jamsari, thank you so much for the story. Thank you so much for writing this. This was highly appreciated. I'm glad I was able to get to this story. Thank you so much yet again. So, my final thoughts on the story. Well, to be honest, this is actually a pretty interesting and good Fury Pasta. Like, I'm not gonna lie when I say this. This story actually had a pretty good detail of what this was actually going for. I really do find that this story actually had a pretty good detail regards to that. I really do find that the story actually had a good conclusion. But not only that, I actually really found the story to be rather amazing, really well made in detail, and I actually really found the story to be rather enjoyable. Now, I definitely have to say that the story actually provided pretty good detail in regards to, the good, concept of what this is going for. Now, this is all very believable. I'm not gonna lie. This was all believable, and I really have to say, hey, really do that. So, I really have to say that this story was actually pretty nice. But I really do think that this story actually provided a pretty good pasta for what this is. This is actually very believable, as the person who wrote this story actually did a pretty good job. I really do agree with this theory. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I actually agree with this theory. So, I guess with that, what I'm trying to say is that I really do find the theory to be rather enjoyable, really well made in detail, and I really have to say that I really like how everything went out. It's a pretty good Fury, not gonna lie. It's really well made in detail. I really do like it. I really do like how this Fury is going. It's a pretty good Fury. I really do like it. It's well made in detail. I like this Fury. It's a pretty good one for what this is. I'm really do enjoying how this story went out. It's pretty well made in detail. I really gotta say that this story actually had a really good believability in a sense. I really do like how this went out. It was amazing, very believable, And I have to say, I don't think I've ever seen this movie or the Keroro Gunsou film or anything, but I think it looks pretty good, so I might even consider maybe narrating it. Well, well, I'm already narrating it, but I would consider maybe, well, giving this a watch someday. Not really sure when I'll do it, but I do plan to maybe watch this in the future if I have time. Not gonna really guarantee it, but it's still a pretty good concept. I really do like this. So, I really do think the grammar was pretty good in this story, although there were a couple of grammatical errors and some punctuation errors that just need to be fixed up. But I really do like that this Fury actually had a good concept going for her. I really do like the believability in this pasta. So that's a very good that I actually sat there and did this. This pasta was flat out amazing. I really do agree with this Fury. This Fury is actually believable, which I'm really glad because, you know, a lot of Furies nowadays always focuses on characters in comas and all that. I don't get it why that's the case. But, like, I'm not saying it's, you know, everyone can't do that. Like, I'm just saying a lot of creepypastas like to focus on that when it comes to, well, you could definitely say when it really comes to sitting there and, yeah. But anyways, I guess with that being the case, and with that being said, I really found this story to be rather enjoyable. It's a pretty good story, really good, well made. I really do appreciate, you know, the believability that was in. So this story was actually pretty good. Although the grammatical errors and punctuation errors can be fixed up, but I don't think that would be a problem because, well, I'm sure, you know, wikis like Goshia have like a little thing that can, you know, sit there and help fix grammatical errors. By the way, that's where I'm reading this story, by the way, if you guys are all wanted to know. And the only reason why I don't usually go on Goshia Wiki is because most of the stories kind of suck. The only time I'll go on there is if a fan wrote me a story on there, or, yeah, or fans who wrote me a story on there mainly. Because most of the stories there seem to suck. But anyways, I guess with that being the case, and with that being said, I'm going to sit there and just wrap up the review because there's nothing really much I want to talk about because I already went through it. Now, with that being the case and that being said, this is just simply my own personal opinion, and if you happen to disagree with me, that is fine too. We're all entitled to our own opinions regards to these creepypastas, and this is simply my own personal thoughts. My final rating of this story would have, well, it's a Fury pasta, but if you want to call it a creepypasta, you can. Want to call it a Fury pasta, feel free to. But anyways, I'm going to sit there and give this story I'm going to give this one a 10 out of 10. Pretty good story. It's a really good Fury. Very believable, especially with the believability in it. It's just flat out amazing. There's definitely a lot of time and effort into the story. Now, the grammatical errors can be fixed up just a little bit, but other than that, it's a pretty good pasta. I really do find this story to be rather enjoyable, really well made. And I definitely have to say it's pretty well made. Like, Affan Jamsari, this is a great story. You did really well with this. So, anyways, with that being the case, and with that being said, what did you guys think about this Fury pasta? Did you all enjoy it? Did you not? Also, what you have done personally to help make this story a lot better? Feel free to leave me know what your thoughts are down in the comment section down below. I'm the Queen of Lions. Thank you so much for watching today's episode. And if you happen to be brand new here on this channel, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe because I make brand new videos every single day. Don't forget to ring the notification bell to when I upload, so then that way you guys will not miss an upload. And as always, please roll the outro because I'm out.